Welcome to Her True Stories, where sometimes the most shocking betrayals come from the people who should love you most. If you're ready for a story that'll make your jaw drop and your heart pound, then buckle up because what I'm about to tell you will blow your mind. Hit that subscribe button right now because today's tale is about how one moment of family cruelty turned into the most satisfying revenge you'll ever hear. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single twist in this journey from heartbreak to triumph. The sound of champagne glasses clinking and fake laughter echoing through my own living room should have been my first warning. But there I was, standing in the doorway of what used to feel like home, watching my daughter Magnolia and her husband Kieran celebrate something that would change everything between us forever. The date was October 15th, 2023, and I had no idea I was about to lose my family and find myself in ways I never imagined possible. I'm Evangeline Hartwell, and at 67 years old, I thought I understood what family meant. I'd spent the last 15 years living in this beautiful colonial house in Westchester County, New York, ever since my husband passed and left me with more money than I knew what to do with. The house had 6 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, and enough space for the family gatherings I'd always dreamed of hosting. But dreams have a way of turning into nightmares when you least expect it. That Sunday afternoon started like any other. I was in my kitchen making my famous apple cinnamon cookies when I heard Magnolia's car pull into the driveway. She'd been coming over every weekend for months, always bringing Kieran, always staying for dinner, always asking subtle questions about my finances. I should have seen the pattern, but love makes you blind to the ugliest truths. Magnolia burst through the front door like she owned the place, her designer heels clicking on my hardwood floors. At 34, she was still as beautiful as the day she graduated college, with perfectly styled blonde hair and clothes that cost more than some people's rent. Behind her walked Kieran, all 6 feet of entitled swagger, running his fingers through his dark hair like he was posing for a magazine cover. "Mom," Magnolia called out, her voice carrying that fake sweetness I'd been hearing more and more lately. "We have the most amazing news to share with you." I wiped my hands on my apron and walked into the living room, where they'd already made themselves comfortable on my antique sofa. Kieran had his arm around Magnolia's shoulders, and both of them were grinning like they'd just won the lottery. The coffee table between us held their phones, tablets, and what looked like a stack of colorful brochures. "What's all this excitement about?" I asked, settling into my favorite armchair across from them. Magnolia leaned forward, her eyes sparkling with an enthusiasm that made my stomach flutter with nervous anticipation. "Mom, you know how Kieran and I have been working so hard these past few years? Well, we finally decided we deserve a real vacation. Not just a weekend getaway, but something truly special." Kieran picked up one of the brochures and handed it to me. The cover showed a massive cruise ship against a sunset sky, with bold letters spelling out Royal Caribbean's Ultimate World Cruise, 180 days of luxury. My hands shook slightly as I opened it, seeing page after page of exotic destinations, 5-star dining, and accommodations that looked more like palace suites than ship cabins. "A world cruise," I said slowly, trying to process what I was looking at. "This looks incredible, sweetheart. You too will have such a wonderful time." Magnolia and Kieran exchanged a look that should have set off every alarm bell in my head. It was the kind of glance people share when they're about to ask for something big, something they know might be difficult to get. "Well, Mom," Magnolia said, her voice taking on that careful tone people use when they're about to drop a bomb. "The thing is, we've already put down a deposit. We're so excited about this opportunity, and we know you'll want to be part of making our dreams come true." I felt my smile falter as understanding began to creep in. "Part of making your dreams come true?" Kieran leaned forward, flashing that charming smile that had won over my daughter 5 years ago. "Evangeline, you know how much Magnolia means to me, and I know how much you love her. This cruise is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for us to really reconnect and strengthen our marriage. But the cost is, well, it's significant. How significant? I asked, though I was starting to suspect I didn't want to know the answer. Magnolia reached over and took my hand in hers. Her skin was soft and warm, manicured to perfection, and for a moment I remembered the little girl who used to hold my hand while we walked to the park. Mom, the total cost for both of us is $80,000. I know it sounds like a lot, but when you break it down over 6 months, it's really quite reasonable for what we're getting. $80,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. I'd heard Magnolia mention expensive vacations before, but this was beyond anything I'd imagined. I looked down at the brochure again, seeing the fine print about premium suites, specialty dining packages, and exclusive shore excursions that turned a cruise into a floating palace experience. Sweetheart, I said carefully, that's a substantial amount of money. Have you and Kieran been saving for this? The question hung in the air for a moment too long. Kieran's smile grew tighter, and Magnolia's grip on my hand became almost painful. Mom, you know we've been trying to save, Magnolia said, her voice taking on a defensive edge. But with the cost of living these days and Kieran's business still getting off the ground, it's been challenging. We thought maybe you could help us out. You know, as an early inheritance kind of thing. Early inheritance. The phrase made my blood run cold. These were my children asking for help with the down payment on a house or assistance with medical bills. This was my daughter asking me to fund a luxury vacation that cost more than many people made in 2 years, and framing it like she was doing me a favor by letting me contribute to her happiness. Magnolia, I said slowly, I need you to understand something. Your father and I worked very hard for our money. We saved, we sacrificed, and we made careful decisions about how to spend what we earned. $80,000 isn't pocket change. It's a significant investment, and I need to think about whether funding a vacation is the best use of those resources. The change in the room was immediate and terrifying. Magnolia's face went from hopeful to hurt to angry in the span of about 3 seconds. She pulled her hand away from mine like I'd burned her. I can't believe you're being like this, she said, her voice rising. We're not asking you to go broke, Mom. We know you have more than enough money. You live in this huge house all by yourself. You drive a car that's probably worth more than most people's houses, and you never spend money on anything fun. Why can't you spend some of it on your own daughter's happiness? Kieran was nodding along, his expression shifting from charming to calculating. Evangeline, I have to agree with Magnolia here. You've been so generous with us over the years, and we really appreciate that. But this isn't just about a vacation. This is about investing in our relationship, in our future. And isn't that worth something to you? I felt like I was in some kind of alternate reality where asking for $80,000 for a cruise was considered reasonable, and refusing to pay for it made me the villain. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw a stranger wearing Magnolia's face. I'm not saying no, I said, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable. I'm saying I need time to think about this. $80,000 is a lot of money, and I want to make sure I'm making the right decision for everyone involved. Magnolia stood up so fast that she knocked over her water glass, sending liquid spilling across my coffee table and onto the expensive Persian rug below. Time to think about it? Mom, we need to finalize the booking by tomorrow. This isn't some random vacation we decided on last week. We've been planning this for months. Then why is this the first I'm hearing about it? I asked, genuinely confused. Kieran's laugh was cold and sharp. Because we knew you'd react exactly like this. We knew you'd find some way to make our happiness about your money and your control. The accusation hit me like a slap. Kieran, that's not fair. I've never tried to control anyone with money. I've been generous with both of you because I love you and I want you to be happy. But asking me to fund an $80,000 vacation with 1 day's notice isn't reasonable, and you know it. Magnolia was pacing now, her designer heels clicking angrily on my hardwood floors. You know what, Mom? I'm tired of this. I'm tired of having to beg you for help with everything. I'm tired of feeling like I have to justify wanting nice things to someone who has more money than she could spend in 3 lifetimes. Magnolia, please calm down. Let's talk about this rationally. Rationally, she spun around to face me, her face flushed with anger. You want to talk rationally? Let's talk about how you've been living in this house that's way too big for one person while your daughter and son-in-law have been struggling to make ends meet. Let's talk about how you spend more on gardening services in a month than most people spend on groceries. I felt tears starting to burn behind my eyes. This wasn't the daughter I'd raised. This wasn't a sweet, thoughtful girl who used to help me bake cookies and tell me about her dreams. This was someone I barely recognized, someone who seemed to see me as nothing more than a source of funding for her lifestyle. I've helped you both many times over the years, I said quietly. I paid for your wedding. I helped with the down payment on your condo. I've covered emergency expenses when you needed help. I've never said no when you truly needed something. But this isn't about need, Magnolia. This is about want. Kieran stood up and moved to stand beside his wife, presenting a united front against me. You're right, Evangeline. This is about want. We want to have the kind of life that your money could easily provide. We want to enjoy ourselves while we're young enough to appreciate it. And we want to feel like family members instead of charity cases begging for scraps. The cruelty of his words took my breath away. I looked at Magnolia, hoping to see some sign that she disagreed with her husband's assessment, but her face was set in hard lines of resentment and entitlement. I need you both to leave, I said quietly. I need some time to process this conversation and figure out how we move forward from here. Magnolia laughed, but there was no humor in it. Oh, you need time? You need space? Well, let me make this really simple for you, Mom. Either you write us a check for that cruise by tomorrow morning, or you can figure out somewhere else to live. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at my daughter, unable to believe what I'd just heard. What did you say? You heard me, Magnolia said, her voice cold and steady. This house, this property, everything here belongs to Dad's estate, which means it belongs to me now. I've been letting you live here out of kindness, but that kindness has conditions. And one of those conditions is that you act like a real mother instead of a stingy old woman hoarding money she can't take with her. I felt the world tilting around me. Magnolia, that's not how your father's will works. I have rights to this property as his surviving spouse. Kieran pulled out his phone and started scrolling through something. Actually, Evangeline, I've been doing some research into estate law, and I think you might be surprised by what I found. There are provisions in your husband's will that could be interpreted in various ways, especially if someone was to challenge your mental competency or your ability to manage the property responsibly. The threat was clear, even wrapped in legal language. They were telling me that if I didn't pay for their cruise, they would find a way to take my home away from me. The home where I'd lived with my husband for 15 years, where I'd raised my daughter, where every room held memories of the life we'd built together. I can't believe you're threatening me, I whispered. Magnolia moved closer to me, her face twisted with an anger I'd never seen before. I'm not threatening you, Mom. I'm giving you a choice. Be the mother I need you to be, or deal with the consequences of your selfishness. When I didn't respond immediately, when I just sat there trying to process the complete destruction of everything I thought I knew about my relationship with my daughter, Magnolia's anger exploded into something violent and terrifying. She grabbed my shoulders and shook me hard enough to make my teeth rattle. Do you hear me? You stubborn, selfish old woman. You will pay for our cruise, or you will find somewhere else to live. Those are your only options. The physical contact shocked me more than anything else that had happened. Magnolia had never laid a hand on me in anger, not even as a child. But here she was, shaking me like a rag doll while screaming about money and threatening to throw me out of my own home. I pulled away from her grip and stood up, my legs shaky, but my voice steady. "Get out of my house. Both of you. Right now." Kieran laughed, and the sound was like nails on a chalkboard. "Your house? Evangeline, I think you're confused about who owns what around here. But don't worry, we'll give you until tomorrow morning to come to your senses. After that, after that you might want to start looking at apartments." As they gathered their cruise brochures and headed toward the door, Kieran turned back to me with a smile that was pure poison. "Oh, and Evangeline? In case you were wondering, you really are useless. A mother who won't support her own daughter's happiness? That's not a mother at all. That's just a sad old woman with money and no one who really loves her." The front door slammed behind them with enough force to rattle the windows, leaving me standing alone in my living room, surrounded by the evidence of my life being torn apart. The water from Magnolia's overturned glass was still spreading across my coffee table, seeping into papers and photographs that had been sitting there peacefully just an hour before. I sank back into my armchair and tried to make sense of what had just happened. In the span of one conversation, I'd lost my daughter, been threatened with homelessness, and discovered that the people I loved most in the world saw me as nothing more than a source of money. The worst part wasn't even the threats or the cruelty. The worst part was the sudden, crushing realization that this hadn't happened overnight. This resentment, this entitlement, this willingness to destroy our relationship over money had been building for months, maybe years, and I'd been too blind to see it. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea growing cold in my hands, staring out at the garden my husband and I had planted together, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. By morning, I'd made a decision that would change all of our lives forever. I wasn't going to pay for the cruise, and I wasn't going to let them take my home. But I also wasn't going to stay and fight a battle that would only bring more ugliness and pain into my life. Instead, I was going to disappear, and in doing so, I was going to teach my daughter and her husband exactly what it felt like to lose someone they claimed to love. At exactly 7 a.m. on October 16th, 2023, I started packing. Not everything, just the essentials. Clothes, important documents, family photographs, and the small jewelry box that held my most precious mementos. Everything else, all the furniture and decorations and household items that made the house feel like home, I left exactly where it was. By 9 a.m., I was loading my car with 3 suitcases and a cooler full of food. I had no destination in mind, no plan beyond getting as far away from Westchester County as possible. I left a note on the kitchen counter, short and simple. "You wanted me gone. Congratulations. Evangeline." I drove south with no particular destination, just needing distance between myself and the ruins of my family relationships. The October weather was perfect for a road trip, cool and crisp with leaves turning brilliant shades of red and gold along the highways. Under different circumstances, I might have enjoyed the scenery. Instead, I spent the first few hours of driving crying so hard I had to pull over twice to compose myself. By evening, I found myself in a small town in Virginia called Cedar Falls, population 3,847 according to the welcome sign. It was the kind of place that looked like it hadn't changed much in the past 50 years, with a main street lined with local businesses and houses that had character instead of showroom perfection. I checked into a bed and breakfast called the Magnolia Inn, which felt like the universe was mocking me, but the owner was a kind woman named Betty who didn't ask questions about why someone my age was traveling alone with tear-stained cheeks. The room was small but comfortable, with a quilt-covered bed and windows that looked out over a garden where late-season flowers were still blooming. I sat on the bed and called my lawyer, Harrison Mitchell, who'd been handling my legal affairs since my husband died. Evangeline, Harrison said when he answered, his voice warm with genuine concern. I wasn't expecting to hear from you. Is everything all right? I told him everything. The crew's demand, the threats about the house, the physical confrontation with Magnolia, and my decision to leave rather than fight. Harrison listened without interruption, occasionally making small sounds of disbelief or anger. Evangeline, he said when I finished, I need you to know that what they told you about the house and your husband's will is completely wrong. You have absolute legal right to that property as his surviving spouse. There's no provision that would allow Magnolia to evict you, and no court would support her claims about your mental competency based on refusing to fund their vacation. The relief was overwhelming. So, I can go home? Legally, yes. But before you do, I think we need to talk about some other things. How long has Magnolia been making these kinds of demands? I thought about it carefully. It's been getting worse over the past year or so. Smaller amounts at first, emergency expenses that always seemed to come up right when she needed them. But this is the first time she's demanded anything this large, and the first time she's threatened me. Harrison was quiet for a moment. Evangeline, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Do you think Magnolia and Kieran see you as a person they love, or as a source of money they're entitled to? The question hit me like a punch to the stomach, because I already knew the answer. I think they see me as money. Then maybe it's time to find out what happens when that money isn't available to them anymore. Over the next 2 days, Harrison and I worked out a plan that was both simple and devastating. If Magnolia and Kieran wanted to treat me like nothing more than a source of funding, then I would show them exactly what life looked like without that funding. First, we moved all of my assets into a new trust that only Harrison and I had access to. My checking accounts, savings accounts, investment portfolios, everything that had my name on it disappeared into legal structures that made it impossible for anyone else to touch. From the outside, it would look like I'd lost everything, like some kind of financial disaster had wiped out my wealth overnight. Second, we arranged for me to inherit a small cottage in Cedar Falls from a fictional relative. The property actually belonged to one of Harrison's clients who was looking for a long-term renter, but the paperwork made it look like I was now living on the charity of distant family members. To anyone checking, Evangeline Hartwell had gone from wealthy widow to impoverished dependent in a matter of days. Third, and most importantly, we made sure that Magnolia and Kieran would find out about my financial ruin in the most devastating way possible. Harrison explained that while this plan involved deception, it was completely legal since we weren't defrauding anyone or stealing money. We were simply restructuring my legitimate assets and creating a fictional scenario to test my family's true intentions. No crimes were being committed, and no one was being financially harmed except potentially those who were trying to manipulate me. On October 19th, 2023, 3 days after I'd left Westchester County, Harrison called Magnolia with news that would turn her world upside down. Miss Hartwell, he said, using his most professional attorney voice, I'm calling to inform you of some significant changes in your mother's financial situation. There's been what appears to be a substantial fraud involving her investment accounts, and I'm afraid she's lost most of her assets. I was sitting in Harrison's office listening to the call on speakerphone, and even I was impressed by how convincing he sounded. He explained that I'd apparently fallen victim to a sophisticated financial scam, that my accounts had been drained by criminals who'd gained access to my personal information, and that the authorities were investigating but held little hope of recovering the funds. How much? Magnolia asked, her voice small and scared. Preliminary estimates suggest she's lost approximately 90% of her liquid assets. The house will likely need to be sold to cover remaining debts, and even then, there may not be enough to satisfy all creditors. The silence on the other end of the phone stretched for so long that I thought the call had dropped. Finally, Magnolia spoke, and her voice was barely a whisper. What about the inheritance? What about everything Dad left. I'm afraid that's all part of what's been compromised. Miss Hartwell, I need to ask you something, and please be honest with me. Did your mother give you any substantial gifts or transfers of money in the days before this happened? No, Magnolia said quickly. Nothing like that. She refused to help us with something we needed, and we had an argument about it, but she didn't give us any money. Harrison made sympathetic noises. I see. Well, if the authorities determine that any transfers were made as part of this fraud scheme, those funds might need to be returned to help satisfy creditors. I'll keep you informed as the investigation progresses. After Harrison hung up, we sat in his office grinning at each other, like conspirators. Phase 1 of our plan was complete. Now we just had to wait and see how Magnolia and Kieran would react to the news that their golden goose had been cooked. We didn't have to wait long. That evening, my phone started ringing. First Magnolia, then Kieran, then Magnolia again. I didn't answer any of the calls, but I listened to the voicemails they left, and each one was more desperate than the last. Mom, please call me back. Harrison told me what happened, and I'm so sorry. We need to talk about this. Please, I'm worried about you. Evangeline, it's Kieran. Look, I know we had some harsh words the other day, but family is family. We want to help you through this difficult time. Call us back. Mom, I've been calling for hours. Where are you? I went to the house and you're not there. Please, I need to know you're okay. I love you, and I'm sorry about everything. The messages continued for days, each one more frantic than the last. They'd driven to the house and found it empty except for my note. They'd called hospitals and police stations, afraid something terrible had happened to me. The irony was perfect. They'd spent years taking me for granted, and now that they thought I was gone, they were falling apart. By October 25th, the voicemails had taken on a different tone. Desperation had replaced anger, and genuine fear had replaced entitlement. Mom, please, wherever you are, just let me know you're alive. I don't care about the money. I don't care about any of it. I just need to know my mother is okay. I love you so much, and I'm so sorry for everything I said. Please come home. That message, left by Magnolia at 2:17 a.m. with tears clearly audible in her voice, almost broke my resolve. Almost. But then I remembered the feel of her hands on my shoulders as she shook me, the coldness in Kieran's voice when he called me useless, and the months of subtle manipulation that had led to that confrontation. They weren't sorry about what they'd done. They were sorry about the consequences. On November 1st, 2023, exactly 2 weeks after I'd disappeared, Harrison made another call to Magnolia. This time, the news was even worse. Miss Hartwell, I'm afraid I have additional bad news about your mother's situation. The authorities have determined that the fraud was even more extensive than initially believed. Not only are her assets gone, but there are substantial debts that will need to be satisfied. The house will definitely need to be sold, and there's a possibility that creditors may come after family members who received gifts or benefits from your mother in recent years. What does that mean? Magnolia asked, her voice shaking. It means that if you received any money from your mother in the past 5 years, you may be required to return those funds to help satisfy her debts. The wedding expenses, the down payment assistance, any emergency fund she provided, all of that could be considered preferential transfers that creditors can claw back. I could hear Magnolia crying through the phone. Harrison, we don't have that money anymore. We spent it. We used it for living expenses and payments, and we don't have it. I understand, Miss Hartwell. These are difficult circumstances for everyone involved. But the law is clear about creditor rights in cases of substantial fraud. I'll do my best to protect your interests, but I can't make any promises. After that call, the voicemails stopped for 3 days. When they started again, they carried a new level of desperation that was both heartbreaking and satisfying. Mom, I know you're out there somewhere, and I know you can hear these messages. I don't know how to fix what we did to you, but I'm begging you to come home. The lawyers are saying we might lose everything because of Dad's debts, and I can't handle this alone. I need my mother. Please. Evangeline, this is Kieran. I know I said things I shouldn't have said. I know I treated you in ways that were wrong and hurtful. I'm not asking for forgiveness because I don't deserve it. I'm just asking you to come home so we can figure out how to get through this together. Mom, it's been 3 weeks since anyone has seen you. I'm scared something terrible has happened. I'm scared you're hurt or sick or worse. Please just send me a text message or something. Just let me know you're alive. I'll do anything, pay anything, give up anything if you'll just come home. On November 15th, exactly 1 month after my disappearance, I decided it was time for phase 2 of my plan. I drove back to Westchester County, but instead of going to my house, I went to the local coffee shop where I knew Magnolia liked to work on her laptop. I wanted to see her before she saw me, to gauge exactly how much my absence had affected her. What I saw broke my heart and satisfied my need for justice in equal measure. Magnolia was sitting alone at a corner table, surrounded by legal documents and tissue boxes. She looked like she'd aged 5 years in the past month. Her perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She wasn't wearing makeup, and her clothes looked like she'd slept in them. This wasn't the entitled princess who'd demanded $80,000 for a cruise. This was a broken woman who'd lost everything that mattered to her. I watched her for 10 minutes before approaching her table. When she looked up and saw me, her face went through every emotion possible in the span of about 3 seconds. Shock, relief, joy, fear, guilt, and desperate hope all flickered across her features before she settled on something that looked like complete surrender. "Mom," she whispered, like she wasn't sure I was real. "Hello, Magnolia." She stood up so fast that she knocked over her coffee cup, sending liquid splashing across her legal documents. But she didn't even notice. She just threw her arms around me and held on like I was the only thing keeping her from drowning. "I thought you were dead," she sobbed into my shoulder. "I thought something terrible had happened to you, and it was all my fault. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry for everything." I let her hold me for a moment, feeling the genuine desperation in her embrace. This wasn't manipulation or performance. This was real grief and real regret from someone who'd learned exactly what it felt like to lose something precious. "We need to talk," I said quietly. We sat down at her table, and I looked at the papers scattered around her. Legal documents, debt calculations, property assessments, and what looked like bankruptcy paperwork. She'd clearly been trying to figure out how to deal with what she thought was my financial ruin. "Tell me what you've been doing for the past month," I said. Magnolia wiped her eyes with a soggy tissue. "Trying to find you. Trying to understand what happened with your money. Trying to figure out how to help you and how to keep us all from losing everything. And the cruise." She looked at me like I'd asked about something from another lifetime. "We canceled it. The deposit was non-refundable, but we canceled it the day Harrison called with the news about your finances." "Mom, I don't care about any cruise. I just want my mother back." "What about Kieran? How has he been handling all this?" Magnolia's face darkened. "Kieran left me last week." The words hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd expected something like this might happen. "He left you. He said he didn't sign up to be married to someone whose family was broke and in debt. He said he couldn't handle the stress of potentially being liable for returning money we don't have. He said he needed to protect his own financial future." Fresh tears started flowing down her cheeks. "He served me with divorce papers 3 days ago." I felt a mixture of satisfaction and genuine sadness. Satisfaction because Kieran had revealed his true character in exactly the way I'd hoped he would. Sadness because my daughter was genuinely heartbroken, and despite everything that had happened between us, I didn't want to see her in pain. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. No, you're not, Magnolia said with a bitter laugh. You're probably glad he's gone. You never liked him anyway. You're right. I didn't like him, but I didn't want to see you hurt. We sat in silence for a few minutes, both of us processing the complex emotions of our reunion. Finally, Magnolia spoke again, her voice small and broken. Mom, I need you to know that I understand what I did to you was terrible. I understand that I treated you like an ATM instead of a person. I understand that I threatened you and hurt you and said things that can never be taken back. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. What made you realize that? Losing you. The answer was immediate and honest. The minute Harrison told me about your financial problems, all I could think about was finding you and making sure you were okay. Not because of the money, but because you're my mom and I love you, and I couldn't handle the thought of you going through something terrible all alone. And when you couldn't find me, I fell apart. Completely. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't think about anything except how the last conversation we'd had was me screaming at you and threatening to throw you out of your own house. She was crying again, and her voice was shaking with genuine remorse. I kept thinking about how you must have felt, how scared and hurt you must have been, and I realized that I'd become someone I didn't recognize. Someone cruel and selfish and horrible. I reached across the table and took her hand in mine. Her skin was cold and her fingers were shaking, but she held on tight like she was afraid I might disappear again. Magnolia, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen carefully. She nodded, her eyes wide and fearful. There was no fraud. There are no debts. I didn't lose my money to criminals. The confusion on her face was immediate and complete. What do you mean? I mean, I lied. Harrison and I created a fake story about financial fraud to see how you and Kieran would react when you thought my money was gone. The color drained from Magnolia's face as understanding dawned. You faked being broke? I wanted to find out if you loved me, or if you loved my money. I wanted to see what would happen when the money wasn't available anymore. And I got my answer. Magnolia pulled her hand away from mine and stared at me with a mixture of shock, hurt, and something that looked like anger. You put me through a month of hell to test me? You put me through years of increasing demands and manipulation, culminating in a threat to throw me out of my own home if I didn't pay for your luxury vacation. I put you through a month of facing reality. The accusation hung between us for a moment. Then Magnolia's expression shifted from anger to something deeper and more complex. You're right, she said quietly. I did those things. I became someone terrible, and I hurt you in ways that are unforgivable. But Mom, this past month, thinking I'd lost you forever, has been the worst time of my entire life. Not because of the money problems, but because I thought I'd never get the chance to tell you how sorry I am. I studied my daughter's face, looking for signs of manipulation or performance. But what I saw was genuine remorse, real grief, and a level of self-awareness that she'd never shown before. What happens now? She asked. That depends on you. Do you understand why I did what I did? Yes, she said without hesitation. You needed to know if I loved you, or if I was just using you. And I proved that I was using you. I proved that I'd become exactly the kind of person you raised me not to be. And what about Kieran leaving you when he thought the money was gone? Magnolia's laugh was bitter and painful. He proved that he never loved me at all. He married me for access to your wealth, and the minute that wealth disappeared, so did he. I was just too blind to see it. I felt a surge of protective anger toward my daughter, which surprised me. Despite everything she'd done, despite the way she'd treated me, she was still my child, and she was hurting. I'm sorry he hurt you, I said. But I'm not sorry he's gone. Neither am I, Magnolia admitted. Not anymore. The man I thought I married wouldn't have abandoned me when things got difficult. The man I thought I married would have stood by me and helped me figure out how to take care of you. But that man never existed. We talked for another 2 hours in that coffee shop, really talked in a way we hadn't done in years. Magnolia told me about how the pressure of maintaining their expensive lifestyle had gradually changed her priorities, how Kieran's constant complaints about money had made her start seeing me as an obstacle to their happiness instead of a person who deserved respect and love. I started thinking about your money like it was already mine, she admitted. Like you were just holding on to it temporarily before passing it down to me. I stopped seeing it as something you'd worked for and earned, and started seeing it as something I was entitled to. When did that change happen? I think it was gradual at first, but it got really bad after Kieran and I got married. He was always talking about what we could do with your money, always planning for when we'd inherit everything. He made it seem normal to think about your death in financial terms. The revelation made my stomach turn, but it also confirmed what I'd suspected about Kieran's influence on my daughter. Magnolia, I need you to understand something. The money isn't the most important thing here. What matters is that you threatened me, physically grabbed me, and tried to force me out of my own home. Money or no money, that behavior is unacceptable. I know, she said, fresh tears starting to flow. I know, and I hate myself for it. I keep thinking about that moment, about putting my hands on you and shaking you, and I feel sick. You're my mother. You gave me life. You raised me. You loved me unconditionally for 34 years, and I repaid that by threatening you and hurting you. So, what are you going to do to make sure it never happens again? Magnolia was quiet for a long moment, clearly thinking seriously about the question. I want to go to therapy. I want to understand how I became someone capable of treating you that way. I want to figure out how to be the daughter you deserved all along. And what about money? What about your expectations for inheritance and support? I don't want any of it, she said firmly. I want to earn my own way, build my own life, and prove to myself and to you that I can be independent and responsible. I want you to keep your money and spend it however makes you happy, and I want our relationship to be based on love instead of financial dependence. The words sounded sincere, but I'd been fooled before. How do I know you mean that? Because I've spent the last month learning what it feels like to live without your safety net, and I survived. It was scary and difficult, but I survived. And more importantly, I learned that having you in my life matters more than having your money. If you're still with me on this incredible journey, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because this story is far from over and you won't believe what happens next. Over the next few weeks, I watched Magnolia carefully, looking for signs that her remorse was genuine or just another manipulation. But what I saw was a woman genuinely trying to rebuild herself from the ground up. She filed for divorce from Kieran, citing irreconcilable differences, and refused to ask for alimony despite being legally entitled to it. She moved out of their expensive condo and into a modest one-bedroom apartment that she could afford on her own income from her job at a local marketing firm. Most importantly, she never asked me for money. Not once. Even when her car broke down and needed expensive repairs, even when she had to choose between buying groceries and paying her electric bill, she figured it out herself. She picked up freelance work, sold jewelry and designer clothes, and learned to live within her means for the first time in her adult life. The change was remarkable and, I had to admit, impressive. But I wasn't ready to completely trust it yet. The real test would come when she learned the truth about my money. On December 20th, 2023, exactly 2 months after our reunion in the coffee shop, I decided it was time for the final phase of my plan. I invited Magnolia to Christmas dinner at my house, just the two of us, like we used to do when she was young. She arrived at exactly 6 p.m., carrying a small gift wrapped in newspaper because, as she explained with embarrassment, she couldn't afford fancy wrapping paper. She was wearing jeans and a sweater that looked like they'd come from a discount store, but she looked healthier than she had in months. There was something different about her posture, her expression, even the way she moved. She looked like someone who was finally comfortable in her own skin. "Thank you for inviting me," she said, handing me the gift. "I wasn't sure if you'd want to spend Christmas with me after everything that's happened." "You're my daughter," I said simply. "Christmas wouldn't be the same without you." We had dinner in the kitchen, eating the pot roast I'd made and talking about everyday things. Magnolia told me about her job, her tiny apartment, and the cooking classes she'd started taking because eating out had become too expensive. She seemed genuinely happy in a way that surprised me. "I know this sounds strange," she said over dessert, "but I think losing everything might have been the best thing that ever happened to me." "Not losing you," she added quickly. "That was horrible. But losing the money, the lifestyle, even Kieran. It forced me to figure out who I really am underneath all the expensive clothes and fancy dinners." "And who are you?" "Someone who's stronger than I thought. Someone who can take care of herself. Someone who values relationships more than bank accounts." She smiled, and it was the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in years. "Someone you can be proud to call your daughter." "I've always been proud to call you my daughter," I said, "even when I was disappointed in your choices." After dinner, we moved to the living room where this whole nightmare had started 3 months earlier. It felt surreal to be sitting in the same chairs, having a peaceful conversation instead of screaming threats and accusations. "Magnolia," I said, settling into my armchair, "there's something I need to tell you." She tensed slightly, probably expecting bad news. "What is it, Mom?" "Do you remember what I told you about the financial fraud? About losing all my money to criminals?" "Of course. That's why we're in this situation." "Well, there's something you should know about that story." I paused, watching her face carefully. It wasn't true. The confusion was immediate. "What do you mean it wasn't true?" "I mean there was no fraud. There are no debts. I never lost my money. Harrison and I made the whole thing up." Magnolia stared at me for a long moment, processing what I'd just said. When understanding finally dawned, her reaction wasn't what I'd expected. She laughed. Not bitterly or angrily, but with genuine amusement. "You faked being broke to test whether I loved you or your money," she said, shaking her head in amazement. "That's brilliant, Mom. Absolutely brilliant." "You're not angry?" "Angry?" She laughed again.
I'm impressed.
"You saw right through Kieran and me, didn't you? You knew we were using you, and you found the perfect way to prove it." "Are you upset that I put you through all that stress and worry?" Magnolia was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "No," she said finally.
I'm grateful.
"If you hadn't done that, I would have kept being the same selfish, entitled person I'd become. I would have kept taking you for granted and treating you like an ATM instead of my mother. That month, when I thought I'd lost you forever, was the wake-up call I needed. Even though it was based on a lie. Especially because it was based on a lie. You showed me exactly what my priorities were. When I thought you were broke and missing, all I cared about was finding you and making sure you were okay. The money didn't matter. The cruise didn't matter. Nothing mattered except getting my mother back." I felt tears starting to form in my eyes. This wasn't the reaction I'd expected, but it was exactly what I'd hoped for. "What about Kieran leaving you when things got difficult?" "Kieran leaving me was the second best thing that happened," Magnolia said firmly. "It showed me exactly what kind of man I'd married. Someone who only wanted me for what my family could provide. When that wasn't available anymore, he disappeared faster than snow in July." "Do you miss him?" "I miss the person I thought he was. But that person never existed. The real Kieran was exactly what you saw from the beginning, a user who saw our family as a source of income instead of people to love and respect." We talked for another hour about the lessons she'd learned, the changes she'd made, and the person she was becoming. When she finally got up to leave, she hugged me tighter than she had since she was a little girl. "Mom," she said, "I need you to know something. Even if you really had lost all your money, even if we really were facing bankruptcy and debt, I would still want you in my life. You're worth more than any amount of money, and I'm sorry it took me so long to remember that. I love you too, sweetheart. There's one more thing," she said, pulling away to look at me seriously. "I don't want your money. Not now, not ever. I want to build my own life, earn my own way, and have a relationship with you that's based on love instead of financial dependence. What if I want to help you sometimes? What if I want to buy you Christmas gifts or take you out to dinner? That's different. That's normal parent-child stuff. I'm talking about the big things, the lifestyle funding, the expectation that your money should pay for my wants instead of just my needs." She smiled. "I like the person I'm becoming, and I don't want to go back to being someone who sees her mother as a bank account." 6 months later, in June of 2024, I was sitting in my garden reading when I heard a car pull into my driveway. I looked up to see Magnolia getting out of her modest used car, wearing work clothes and carrying what looked like a picnic basket. She called out as she walked across the lawn, "I brought lunch, and I have some news to share." We spread a blanket under my favorite oak tree and unpacked the sandwiches and lemonade she'd brought. Magnolia was practically glowing with excitement about something. "Okay, what's the news?" I asked. "I got a promotion," she said, grinning from ear to ear. "They made me account manager, and it comes with a 20% raise. I'll actually be able to afford my own health insurance and maybe even start saving for a vacation." "That's wonderful, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you." "And there's something else," she said, her cheeks turning pink. "I've been seeing someone." "Oh, tell me about him." "His name is Marcus Chen, and he's a teacher at the elementary school near my office. I met him at a coffee shop where he was grading papers, and we started talking. He's kind and funny and smart, and he has no idea that you have money. None at all. Nope. As far as he knows, you're a retired widow living on Social Security and a small pension, which, by the way, is how I prefer it. I don't want anyone in my life who might be interested in me for the wrong reasons." I smiled, remembering how different this conversation was from the ones I'd had with her about Kieran. "How long have you been seeing him?" 3 months. I wanted to make sure it was serious before I introduced him to you. "But, Mom, I think you're going to love him. He reminds me of Dad in some ways. Decent, hardworking, more interested in building a life together than in getting rich quick." "I'd love to meet him." "Really? Because I was hoping to bring him to Sunday dinner next week. If that's okay with you." "Of course it's okay. I'll make my famous pot roast." As we sat there in the shade, eating sandwiches and talking about her job and her new relationship, I marveled at the transformation my daughter had undergone. The entitled, demanding woman who'd shaken me and threatened to throw me out of my house had become someone I genuinely enjoyed spending time with. Someone who'd learned to value relationships over money, character over wealth, and independence over dependence. But my revenge wasn't quite complete yet. There was still the matter of Kieran. In August of 2024, exactly 10 months after that terrible confrontation over the cruise, I received a phone call that made me smile in a way that probably wasn't entirely appropriate for a grandmother. "Mrs. Hartwell?" The voice was professional and unfamiliar. "This is Detective Amanda Rodriguez with the Westchester County District Attorney's Office. I'm calling about your former son-in-law, Kieran Morrison." "What about him?" "He's been arrested on charges of fraud and embezzlement. We have evidence that he's been running an elaborate scam targeting wealthy families in the area. We believe he may have attempted to defraud you as well." The irony was delicious. "What kind of evidence do you have?" "Financial records showing that he was systematically draining joint accounts he shared with your daughter, forged documents attempting to establish power of attorney over elderly family members, and communication records that suggest he was running similar schemes with at least 4 other families in the county. It turned out that Kieran's desperation after my financial ruin had led him to make increasingly reckless decisions. When his comfortable life with Magnolia disappeared, he'd started targeting other wealthy widows in the area, using the same charm and manipulation tactics that had worked on my daughter. But Kieran had made one crucial mistake. He tried to run his scam on Eleanor Whitman, an 82-year-old retired judge who'd spent 40 years in the criminal justice system. She'd seen right through his act, played along long enough to gather evidence, and then had him arrested. Mrs. Hartwell, we'd like you to testify about your experiences with Mr. Morrison. Your testimony could help establish a pattern of behavior that would strengthen the case against him. I'd be happy to help. The trial took place in February of 2025, and watching Kieran in handcuffs was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. Gone was the arrogant swagger and entitled charm. In their place was a desperate man who'd finally been caught. During my testimony, I described the crew's demand, the threats about my house, and the way Kieran had tried to manipulate and intimidate me. But I also testified about something else, how he'd abandoned my daughter the moment he thought our family money was gone. Mr. Morrison presented himself as a loving husband, I told the jury. But when he believed our family had lost its wealth, he immediately filed for divorce and disappeared. That's not the behavior of someone who married for love. That's the behavior of someone who married for money. Kieran was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for fraud, embezzlement, and elder abuse. But even more satisfying than the prison sentence was the civil judgment that required him to pay restitution to all of his victims. Every penny he earned for the rest of his life would be garnished to repay the families he'd tried to swindle. On the day of his sentencing, Magnolia and I sat in the courtroom gallery, watching as the judge read the verdict. When it was over, Kieran turned to look at us one last time before being led away in shackles. I hope it was worth it, Magnolia said quietly.
What?
Trying to steal from people who trusted him. I hope the money he thought he was going to get was worth spending the next 8 years in prison. As we walked out of the courthouse, I put my arm around my daughter's shoulders. Are you okay? I know this can't be easy, watching your ex-husband go to prison. I'm fine, she said, and I could tell she meant it. Kieran made his choices, and now he gets to live with the consequences. Just like I had to live with the consequences of my choices. The difference is that you learned from your mistakes and became a better person. Kieran just kept making the same mistakes until they caught up with him. In March of 2025, Magnolia and Marcus got engaged. He proposed with a simple ring that probably cost less than one of her old handbags, and she said yes with tears of joy streaming down her face. It's perfect, she told me when she called to share the news. Not because it's expensive, but because it represents everything I want in a relationship. Love, commitment, partnership. All the things that actually matter. They're planning a small wedding for next fall, and they're paying for it themselves. Magnolia insisted on that, even when I offered to contribute. Mom, this is important to me, she said. I want to start my marriage the way I plan to live it. As an equal partner who contributes rather than someone who takes. But you'll let me buy your wedding dress, won't you? She laughed. That's different. That's a normal mother of the bride gift. Of course you can buy my dress. Today, as I sit in my study writing the story, it's been exactly 18 months since that terrible October day when my daughter demanded $80,000 for a cruise and threatened to throw me out of my own home. The journey from that moment to this one has been painful, complicated, and ultimately transformative for both of us. Magnolia is now someone I genuinely enjoy spending time with. She visits every Sunday for dinner, but not because she expects me to pay for anything or give her money. She comes because she wants to see her mother, because she enjoys my company, and because we've built the kind of relationship I always hoped we'd have. The monthly dinners she hosts for Marcus and me in her tiny apartment are some of my favorite evenings. We eat simple food that she's cooked herself, play board games, and talk about books and movies and dreams for the future. It's everything a family gathering should be: genuine affection, shared experiences, and the comfortable intimacy of people who truly care about each other. As for my money, it's still there, safely invested and growing every year. But now it feels like what it always should have been: a tool for security and generosity rather than a source of conflict and manipulation. I've been able to make substantial donations to causes I care about, and I've had the satisfaction of seeing my wealth used to help people who truly need it. Most importantly, I know that when I die, my money will continue to do good in the world. The bulk of my estate will go to various charities, with a modest trust fund for Magnolia that will provide security without enabling dependence. She knows about this arrangement and fully approves. "I don't need your money to be happy," she told me. "I just need you." The lesson I've learned is that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's worst impulses. Sometimes you have to let people face the consequences of their choices so they can learn to make better ones. And sometimes the most powerful weapon against greed and entitlement is simply removing the thing they think they're entitled to. Magnolia learned that love and money aren't the same thing, and that relationships based on financial dependence rather than mutual respect are doomed to fail. I learned that I'm stronger and more independent than I ever realized, and that I don't have to accept mistreatment from anyone, even family members. Kieran learned that actions have consequences, and that trying to build a life on other people's money instead of your own efforts will eventually catch up with you. The $80,000 cruise that started this whole nightmare never happened, of course. But in a strange way, I'm grateful for that demand and the confrontation it provoked. Without it, we might have continued down the same destructive path for years, with resentment and entitlement slowly poisoning our relationship until there was nothing left to save. Instead, we hit rock bottom and climbed back up together, building something stronger and more honest than what we'd had before. The mother-daughter relationship we have now is based on genuine affection and respect rather than obligation and financial dependence. To anyone listening who's dealing with family members who see you as an ATM rather than a person, remember this: you have the right to say no. You have the right to set boundaries. You have the right to expect respect and gratitude rather than demands and threats. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is let people learn what life is like without your financial support. Don't let anyone convince you that family obligations require you to fund other people's poor decisions or destructive behavior. Real family members will love you whether you give them money or not. Anyone who only values you for what you can provide isn't really family at all. Stand up for yourself. Set boundaries. And never, ever let anyone threaten or manipulate you into compromising your principles. You're stronger than you think, and you deserve better than being treated like a personal bank account. The best revenge isn't always elaborate schemes or public humiliation. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well, setting boundaries, and refusing to let other people's bad behavior define your happiness. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey from betrayal to triumph. If this story touched your heart or opened your eyes to something important, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell to join our community of people who refuse to be victims. Share this story with anyone who needs to hear that it's possible to rebuild broken relationships, but only when everyone involved is willing to do the work. Remember, love without boundaries isn't really love at all. It's enabling. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply say no and mean it. Until next time, this is Real Life Stories, where every ending is really just a new beginning. She moved out of their expensive condo and into a modest apartment that she could afford on her own income. She started seeing a therapist twice a week to work through what she called my entitlement issues and the way I lost myself in someone else's greed. Most importantly, she stopped asking me for money. Not just large amounts, but everything. When her car needed repairs, she figured out how to pay for them herself. When she couldn't afford to go out to expensive restaurants, she learned to cook at home. When she needed new clothes, she shopped at discount stores instead of designer boutiques. The change was remarkable and, I had to admit, impressive. But I wasn't ready to completely trust it yet. On December 15th, 2023, exactly 2 months after my disappearance, I decided it was time for the final test. I invited Magnolia to dinner at my house, the first time she'd been back since that terrible confrontation in October. She arrived at exactly 6 p.m., carrying a bouquet of flowers from the grocery store and wearing jeans and a sweater that looked like they'd come from Target. The contrast with her previous designer wardrobe was striking, but she looked more like the daughter I remembered from her college years. "Thank you for inviting me," she said, handing me the flowers. "I wasn't sure if you'd ever want me in this house again." "Neither was I admitted. "But I think we both need to try." We had dinner in the kitchen instead of the formal dining room, eating homemade pot roast and talking about everyday things. Magnolia told me about her new job working as a receptionist at a veterinary clinic, a position that paid a fraction of what Kieran had been making but gave her a sense of purpose and independence she'd never experienced before. "I love it," she said, her eyes lighting up in a way I hadn't seen in years. "I get to help people take care of their pets, and at the end of the day, I feel like I've actually accomplished something meaningful." "That's wonderful, sweetheart." "The pay isn't great," she continued, "but it's enough to cover my rent and expenses if I'm careful. And being careful feels good, if that makes sense. Like I'm finally learning skills I should have developed years ago." After dinner, we moved to the living room where this whole nightmare had started 2 months earlier. I had something important to discuss with her, something that would test whether her transformation was real or just another performance. "Magnolia," I said, settling into the same armchair where I'd refused to fund her cruise, "I need to tell you about some changes I've made." She tensed slightly, probably expecting bad news. "What kind of changes?" "I've rewritten my will." The color drained from her face, but she didn't speak. She just waited for me to continue. "The old will left everything to you, with the understanding that you'd use the money responsibly and carry on the family legacy. But after what happened between us, I realized that leaving you a large inheritance might not be the best thing for either of us." Magnolia nodded slowly. "I understand. After the way I behaved, I don't deserve to inherit anything." "It's not about deserving," I said. "It's about what would actually make you happy and help you continue growing into the person you're becoming." "What did you decide?" I pulled out a folder containing copies of my new estate planning documents. "I've set up a trust that will provide you with a modest monthly income for the rest of your life. Enough to cover basic living expenses, but not enough to live extravagantly. The bulk of my estate will go to various charities, including animal welfare organizations, since you seem to enjoy working with pets." Magnolia was quiet for a long moment, reading through the documents with careful attention. When she finished, she looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "Mom, this is perfect. You're not disappointed about the money going to charity instead of to you?" "No," she said firmly. "This is exactly what I would have asked for if I'd been brave enough to ask. The monthly income means I'll never have to worry about becoming homeless or starving, but it's not enough to make me lazy or entitled. I'll still need to work, still need to build my own life, but I'll have security. It's the perfect balance." The relief I felt was enormous. This was the final test, and Magnolia had passed with flying colors. She was genuinely grateful for modest security instead of demanding maximum wealth. She understood that the bulk of the money going to charity was actually a better use of resources than funding her lifestyle.
There's one more thing, I said.
I've also set aside money for you to continue therapy for as long as you want it and for any education or training you might want to pursue. If you decide you want to become a veterinary technician or go back to school for anything else, that will be covered. Magnolia started crying again, but these were tears of gratitude rather than grief. You're still taking care of me, even after everything I did to you. You're my daughter. I'll always want to take care of you. But now I'm doing it in a way that helps you grow instead of enabling you to stagnate. We spent the rest of the evening talking about her plans for the future, her therapy progress, and slowly beginning to rebuild the trust that had been shattered by greed and manipulation. It wasn't easy, and it wouldn't happen overnight, but for the first time in months, I felt hopeful about our relationship. But my revenge wasn't complete yet. There was still the matter of Kieran. On January 20th, 2024, exactly 3 months after I disappeared, I received a phone call that made me smile in a way that probably wasn't entirely appropriate for a 67-year-old grandmother. Mrs. Hartwell? The voice on the phone was professional and polite. This is Detective Marcus Sullivan with the Westchester County District Attorney's Office. I'm calling about your son-in-law, Kieran Morrison. Former son-in-law, I corrected. What about him? He's been arrested on charges of fraud and identity theft. We have evidence that he's been using your daughter's personal information to open credit accounts and take out loans without her knowledge. We're also investigating whether he may have been involved in similar schemes with other families. The satisfaction I felt was warm and complete. Kieran's true nature was finally being exposed in a way that would have legal consequences. What kind of evidence do you have? I asked. Credit applications with forged signatures, loan documents that your daughter never signed, and financial records showing that he diverted funds from accounts that he opened in her name. We believe he may have been planning to disappear with the money before your daughter's financial situation changed. In other words, Kieran had been setting up his own escape plan, using Magnolia's credit and identity to fund his exit strategy. The only reason he'd been caught was because the divorce proceedings had required a careful examination of their financial records, and Magnolia's lawyer had discovered accounts and debts she'd never known existed. Will you need me to testify?
Possibly.
We're also investigating whether he may have attempted to defraud elderly individuals in other families he's been involved with. Your experience with his behavior could be relevant to establishing a pattern. I thought about Kieran's smooth manipulation, his practiced charm, and his immediate willingness to abandon Magnolia when he thought the money was gone. Detective Sullivan, I think you'll find that Kieran Morrison is exactly the kind of predator who targets families with elderly members and significant assets. Over the next few months, the investigation into Kieran's activities expanded far beyond what anyone had expected. It turned out that he'd been running variations of the same scam for years, targeting women from wealthy families, marrying them for access to money and resources, and then systematically draining whatever assets he could access before moving on to the next victim. Magnolia had been his longest relationship, probably because my money had been substantial enough to keep him interested for 5 years. But investigators found evidence of at least 3 previous relationships, where he'd followed similar patterns, leaving behind women with destroyed credit and empty bank accounts. The most satisfying part was learning that his arrest had made local news, with headlines like "Local Man Charged in Multifamily Fraud Scheme" and "Marriage Scammer Targets Wealthy Families." His photo was plastered across newspapers and websites, ensuring that any future potential victims would be able to recognize him immediately. Kieran was eventually sentenced to 7 years in federal prison for fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy charges. But even more importantly, the civil lawsuits filed by his various victims meant that he'd be paying restitution for the rest of his life. Any money he ever earned would be garnished to repay the families he'd victimized. In June of 2024, 8 months after that terrible confrontation over a cruise, Magnolia and I were sitting in my garden, drinking lemonade and watching the roses bloom. She'd been consistently working, attending therapy, and rebuilding her life without any financial assistance beyond what I'd specified in the trust. "Mom," she said, setting down her glass and looking at me seriously, "I need to ask you something." "What is it, sweetheart? Do you forgive me? Really and truly forgive me for what I did to you?" I'd been expecting this question for months, and I'd thought carefully about my answer. "I forgive you for being manipulated by someone who turned out to be a criminal. I forgive you for making mistakes and losing sight of what was important. I forgive you for being human and flawed. But I'll never forget what it felt like to have my own daughter threaten me and try to force me out of my home. I'll never forget the look in your eyes when you grabbed me and shook me. Some things leave scars, even when they're forgiven." Magnolia nodded, tears starting to flow down her cheeks. "I understand. And I'll spend the rest of my life making sure I never give you reason to see that look in my eyes again." That's all I can ask for. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, both of us processing the long journey we'd taken from betrayal to reconciliation. Finally, Magnolia spoke again. "I saw in the newspaper that they're sending Kieran to prison for 7 years. "Yes, they are. I should feel bad about that, shouldn't I? He was my husband for 5 years. I consider my answer carefully. "How do you feel about it?" "Relieved," she admitted. "Relieved that he can't hurt anyone else the way he hurt me. Relieved that other families won't have to go through what we went through. And honestly, relieved that he's getting exactly what he deserves." "Then I think you're feeling exactly what you should feel. Do you think he ever loved me at all?" It was a painful question, but one that deserved an honest answer. "I think he loved what you could give him. I think he loved the access you provided to money and social status. But love someone for who they are as a person? I don't think he was capable of that kind of love." Magnolia was quiet for a moment. "You know what's strange? I'm grateful for what happened. Not the part where I hurt you, but the part where I lost everything and had to figure out who I really was underneath all the money and expectations." "What did you find out?" "That I'm stronger than I thought. That I can take care of myself. That I actually enjoy working and earning my own way. And that having a real relationship with you is worth more than any amount of money or any luxury vacation." A year later, in October of 2024, Magnolia brought a man named Oliver to Sunday dinner at my house. He was a veterinarian at the clinic where she worked, a kind and gentle man who drove a 10-year-old Honda and lived in a modest apartment filled with rescue cats. When I asked what he did for fun, he talked about volunteering at animal shelters and hiking in local parks. The contrast with Kieran was striking and wonderful. Oliver was genuinely interested in Magnolia's thoughts and opinions. He asked thoughtful questions about her work, and he treated her like a partner rather than an accessory. Most importantly, he had no idea that I had any money at all, and he didn't seem to care. "I like him," I told Magnolia after Oliver had left. "I like him too," she said with a smile that reminded me of the girl she'd been before money and manipulation had changed her. "He makes me feel like the person I always wanted to be." "And what person is that?" "Someone who's valued for her character instead of her bank account. Someone who contributes to the world instead of just taking from it. Someone you can be proud to call your daughter." "I've always been proud to call you my daughter," I said. "Even when I was disappointed in your choices, I never stopped loving you or believing you could do better. I know that now. It just took me a long time to believe I deserved that kind of love." Today, as I sit in my garden writing the story, it's been exactly 2 years since that terrible October day when my daughter demanded $80,000 for a cruise and threatened to throw me out of my own home. The journey from that moment to this one has been painful, complicated, and ultimately transformative for both of us. Magnolia is now engaged to Oliver, and they're planning a small, simple wedding that they're paying for themselves. She's been promoted to office manager at the veterinary clinic, and she's talking about going back to school to become a veterinary technician. Most importantly, She's become someone I genuinely enjoy spending time with, someone whose company I seek out because I like who she is, not just because she's my daughter. The monthly trust payments I set up for her have given her security without spoiling her. She uses the money to cover basic living expenses, which allows her to save most of her salary for goals like her education and her wedding. She's learned to budget, to prioritize, and to find satisfaction in earning her own way. As for Kieran, he's serving his time in federal prison, and according to the legal updates I receive, he'll be paying restitution to his victims for the rest of his life. The woman he married had wealthy parents, and he'd apparently been planning to run the same scam on them that he'd tried with me. But his arrest put an end to those plans, and his new wife divorced him within weeks of learning about his criminal history. The most satisfying part of my revenge wasn't seeing him go to prison, though that was certainly gratifying. The most satisfying part was watching him reveal his true character in exactly the way I'd predicted he would. When he thought the money was gone, he abandoned my daughter without a second thought, proving that everything I'd suspected about him was true. But the real victory wasn't about Kieran at all. The real victory was getting my daughter back, getting the chance to watch her grow into the person she was always capable of being. The money and the manipulation and the threats had all been symptoms of a deeper problem, and solving that problem required both of us to change. I had to learn to set boundaries and stand up for myself, even when it meant hurting someone I loved. Magnolia had to learn that love and money weren't the same thing, and that relationships based on financial dependency rather than mutual respect were doomed to fail. The $80,000 cruise that started this whole nightmare never happened, of course. But in a strange way, I'm grateful for that demand and the confrontation it provoked. Without it, we might have continued down the same destructive path for years, with resentment and entitlement slowly poisoning our relationship until there was nothing left to save. Instead, we hit rock bottom and climbed back up together, building something stronger and more honest than what we'd had before. The mother-daughter relationship we have now is based on genuine affection and respect rather than obligation and financial dependence. We choose to spend time together because we enjoy each other's company, not because family duty requires it. I've also learned something important about myself over the past 2 years. I'm stronger and more independent than I ever realized. When I thought I might lose my home and my family, I didn't collapse or beg or compromise my principles. I fought back intelligently and strategically, and I won. That's not something I would have believed about myself before this experience, but it's something I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. The money that caused so much trouble is still there, of course, safely invested and growing every year. But now it feels like what it always should have been, a tool for security and generosity, rather than a source of conflict and manipulation. I've been able to make substantial donations to causes I care about, and I've had the satisfaction of seeing my wealth used to help people and animals who truly need it. Most importantly, I know that when I die, my money will continue to do good in the world rather than enabling someone's worst impulses. The charities that will inherit the bulk of my estate are already using my donations to save lives, protect environments, and help families in crisis. That feels like a much better legacy than funding luxury cruises and designer wardrobes. If someone had told me 2 years ago that the worst day of my life would also be the beginning of the best chapter of my relationship with my daughter, I would never have believed them. But life has a way of surprising you, and sometimes the most painful experiences lead to the most meaningful growth. The lesson I've learned is that love without boundaries isn't really love at all. It's enabling. And enabling someone you care about to make destructive choices isn't kindness. It's cruelty disguised as generosity. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to participate in someone else's bad behavior, even when that refusal causes short-term pain. Magnolia learned that money without character is worthless, and that relationships based on what someone can provide rather than who they are as a person will always end in heartbreak. She learned that true security comes from knowing you can take care of yourself, not from having access to someone else's resources. Together, we learned that families can survive terrible betrayals and come out stronger on the other side, but only if everyone involved is willing to do the hard work of changing themselves rather than just expecting others to change. As I finish writing this story, I can hear Magnolia and Oliver in the kitchen, preparing dinner and laughing about something that happened at work. The sound fills me with a contentment I haven't felt in years. This is what family should sound like: genuine affection, shared experiences, and the comfortable intimacy of people who truly enjoy each other's company. The cruise that Kieran and Magnolia demanded money for was supposed to last 180 days and take them around the world. Instead, it took them exactly nowhere, but it took us on a journey that was far more valuable than any vacation could have been. We traveled from entitlement to gratitude, from manipulation to honesty, from broken trust to rebuilt love. And the best part? This journey didn't cost me $80,000. It cost me 1 month of heartache and worry, but it gave me back my daughter and taught me lessons about strength and boundaries that will serve me for the rest of my life.